we welcome you to this festival here in Anaheim. Heritage Festivals have been involved in music education for 32 years based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. As you see on your programs, we are all over the United States even this day, but Anaheim seems to be our favorite spot, at least for the high school students in various high schools. So we welcome to the stage once again from Stockton, California. This is the St. Mary's High School Jazz Ensemble. May I introduce to you Mr. Chad Grimes, their director.
Again, good morning. This morning we will be playing 3 pieces for you again. First one is a Dave Brubeck piece called Blue Rondo Turk. Next one, Round Midnight by Thelonious Monk. And the last one is up-tempo tune called Chameleon by Herbie Hancock.
me introduce you to Dr. Michael Clark.
Can you hear me? There we go. Hey, good morning, and good job today. I really enjoyed your performance. I like the energy that you bring. I can really tell that you bring a lot of passion to your performance. So my comments here are really to help you take what you're doing right now and just sort of bump it up to the next step. The first thing I would warn you of is when you're tuning at the beginning, make sure that you're not just blowing a note, that you're really sort of centering your sound and really thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to make the most beautiful sound of my instrument possible. And so a lot of times when people have the tuner in front of them, they're sort of looking at where the dial is. But sometimes it's good to put the tuner away, have just one person tune, and then sort of have everyone match it. And then when you're doing that, just make sure you ask yourself, am I making the most beautiful tone possible? I want to just I'll just make my comments for each piece in the order in which you played them. Good work with the blue rondo, the tempo that you had, the articulations that you played in there were all really nice. I really like a lot of times when you have that really fast da-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-da, a lot of people miss that staccato, and you guys had it in there, so I really appreciate it. Good job with a lot of the solos. You guys bring a lot of really good character to the work. I like your dynamic contrasts. Those were all really nice to bring those out. In Round Midnight, I think Thelonious Monk is one of the hardest composers to pull off. It's very, in many ways, very subtle. And so what I would ask for some of you who have some of these solos at the beginning is to think about how long your whole melodic line is, beginning to end. And then take some time to think about how are you going to shape this in the long term. Because I think what happens is sometimes we're just swelling on individual notes too much and not thinking about the long-term sort of shape of the entire phrase that you might have. So just think long-term with those things. Another thing about some of the solos too is manage some of the things that you're doing, because it's really easy to get really loud really quickly and just sort of stay there and keep count of the audience. And those effects are really cool, and they can be really dramatic and really quite effective if you're trying to pull out a certain character of the piece. But you don't want to overdo it. And so think about when you really want to sort of bring out some really expressive character in the piece. Because that way, from an audience perspective, when they're listening to you and you really manage your time and you really wait till that right moment to really sort of pull out some expressive aspects of your whatever soul you're improvising with, it can be about 10 times more dramatic. So sometimes, so the irony is, you can actually be more dramatic by doing less sometimes. So that's something to think about. To think about how, if you're watching a movie, you can go watch a movie that has tons of explosions all over the place, but sometimes the explosions sort of become passe after a while. But if you watch a movie where it's really subtle and slow, and all of a sudden, like explosions happen in the screen, that's a lot more effective for the audience. So just think about that. And then Chameleon, I think you really captured this sort of funk character, and I like actually the choices that you played today. It was 3 very different pieces, and from the audience, it's really enjoyable to listen to. Your articulations are about 90% there. But one thing to be careful of, in measure 13 especially, you have those 16th notes, the tenuto and the staccato, dee-dot, dee-dot, dee-dot. If you can make even more of a contrast between what's the tenuto and the staccato, I think you're going to capture that funk aspect a little bit better. So just remember, dee-dot, dee-dot, dee-dot. And then when you have on beat 4, you have a tenuto over that quarter note, correct? So it's a tenuto, not an accent. And it's very, I always had to yell at my jazz band because they always wanted to accent that. So that's not an accent, it's just a tenuto, and it's just there to give you an indication of the length of the note. Overall, good work with all of the soloists. Put some time and effort into them, and I appreciate it. And good work, and enjoy your time here in Anaheim. Thank you.